My name's Adrian, and I'm 28. I work in IT and have been doing remote contract jobs for the last few years. Nothing flashy, but enough to keep me comfortable. I don't party. I don't post vacation pics with fake captions about living my best life. I just work, save, and occasionally treat myself to some decent headphones or a good bottle of wine. What most people don't know, what I kept quiet about, was that for the past 3 years, I've also been paying my parents' mortgage. It wasn't something we discussed openly. They never asked me outright. It started when Dad lost his job at the logistics company, right before the pandemic hit. My mom was doing part-time childcare, but that dried up too. I overheard them one night arguing in the kitchen, voices low but stressed. Mom saying the bank had called again, Dad muttering about deferring another payment. I was still living at home at the time, saving for a place of my own. I told them I'd help just until things stabilized. Dad had nodded like it was painful to accept, and Mom just squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're a good son." And for a while, it wasn't a big deal. I automated the payments and forgot about it. I stayed in my small upstairs room, bought my own groceries, even handled the electric and internet bills. I never asked for thanks. I figured that was just what you do when you can and your parents need it. But slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. At first, it was subtle. My younger brother, Milo, who was 24 and still living at home too, started making snide comments. He was in and out of jobs, mostly blaming the world for his problems. "Must be nice working in pajamas while the rest of us suffer," he'd mutter as he passed my room. Or, "Hey, did you pay for the Wi-Fi this month, King Adrian?" I laughed it off at first. He was probably just frustrated, I told myself. But then my mom started chiming in too. She'd get irritated if I stayed in my room too long. "You're always holed up in there. This isn't a hotel, you know." If I worked late and didn't come down for dinner, she'd scowl and leave my plate in the sink. And if I dared to ask Milo to clean up after himself in the kitchen or garage, she'd snap. "He's your brother, not your servant. Stop acting like you're above everyone." I was stunned. I never once rubbed my contributions in anyone's face. I still did yard work on weekends, ran errands, even helped them file taxes last spring. But no matter what I did, the respect in the house started to fade. Like the more I gave, the less I seemed to matter. Things came to a head one Sunday afternoon. We were all in the living room. Dad watching football, Mom scrolling through Facebook, Milo complaining about some girl ghosting him. I was on my laptop finishing up a project when Mom suddenly said, "Adrian, we need to talk." I looked up, confused. "We've decided it's time you moved out," she said, arms crossed. "You're too old to still be here, and your attitude lately has been ungrateful." I blinked. "Ungrateful?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad didn't even look at me. "It's time," he said simply, as if he'd rehearsed it. Milo smirked. "I mean, it's not like you're paying rent." That did it. I stood up slowly, trying not to shake. "I've been paying the mortgage. For 3 years." They stared at me, unblinking. Mom scoffed. "That's not the point. You think that buys you the right to talk down to your family?" "I've never once thrown it in your faces," I said. My heart was pounding. "All I've ever done is help." "Help?" she shrieked. "You act like we're charity cases. You're arrogant. You're cold. You think just because you have some job online that you're better than everyone." Dad stood now too. "Enough. Get out. If you can afford to be so smug, then go live on your own. See how easy it is without your mother cooking for you." And then she said it. "Get out and don't come back." I packed that night. Not out of spite, out of sheer disbelief. I didn't scream or slam doors. I took my laptop, my clothes, and a few photos from my dresser drawer. I booked a short-term rental apartment just outside of town, quiet and clean, with good Wi-Fi and no drama. I didn't say goodbye. For the first few days, I tried not to think about it. I poured myself into work, went for long walks, cooked my own meals. It was peaceful. Painful, yes, but peaceful. I didn't check in with them, didn't answer Milo's one attempt at a passive-aggressive, "So how's the big new life?" text. I let the silence settle. Then, 2 weeks later, I woke up to a text from Dad. "The mortgage is past due. Why haven't you paid it?" I stared at it. For a long time. My coffee sat cold on the table. Then I replied, "Didn't you say I wasn't welcome?" The typing bubble blinked for a moment, then disappeared. 5 minutes later, my phone rang. Mom. I let it ring. Then Milo. Ignored. Then Dad again. And again. By noon, I had over 12 missed calls, 6 voicemails, and a flurry of texts. We didn't mean it like that. This is serious, Adrian. The bank called again. You're being immature. Your mother is upset. Don't punish us over a misunderstanding. Your brother has nothing to do with this. This is still your home. My hands trembled, not with guilt, but with something new, clarity. For 3 years I'd kept them afloat while being treated like an afterthought. The moment I stopped, their version of family collapsed into desperation and blame. But that wasn't even the moment that pushed me over the edge. That came 3 days later, when I received a letter in the mail from their bank. And right there, in bold at the top of the page, was my name. Not theirs. Mine. That's when I realized the house was never even in their name to begin with. I sat on the couch with the letter in my lap, my fingers numb as I read and reread the heading. Final notice of delinquent payment. Mortgage account holder, Adrian M. Reyes. My full name. Not my father's. Not my mother's. Mine. I felt my chest tighten, that kind of slow, sickening realization that crawls up your spine like ice. I flipped back through the pages. There it was again, in small print. Primary loan signer, Adrian Reyes. Co-signers, none. None. I stared at the paper, willing it to change. But it didn't. And slowly, the timeline in my head began to reassemble itself. Conversations I hadn't paid attention to, paperwork I'd signed thinking I was just helping process the refinance, phone calls they said were just updates from the bank. I thought I was helping them get a grace period or lower interest. They told me, we just need someone with better credit to sign temporarily. You're our son. It's not like we won't be paying it. But they weren't paying it. They never had. For 3 years, I wasn't just helping. I owned the damn house. They transferred the deed without ever telling me. And somehow, somewhere along the way, I'd become legally responsible for a property that they treated like their own, while treating me like an outsider. My first instinct was denial. I told myself there had to be a mistake. But as I combed through old emails and documents, it became painfully clear. The loan had been structured in my name. The tax records, the insurance, everything was under me. It was all so carefully orchestrated that I almost had to admire it. Almost. My next instinct? Rage. I called the bank. The woman on the line confirmed it all. Yes, I was the sole account holder. No, they couldn't speak to anyone else about the loan. Yes, I was liable for the balance. $217,000. And no, there was no automatic forgiveness just because I didn't live there anymore. When I hung up, I just sat there. Frozen. They had manipulated me. Gaslit me. And then, when they didn't need me anymore, or thought they didn't, they discarded me like trash. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat in silence as the weight of betrayal settled into my bones. By that evening, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to beg or guilt them into treating me like a son again. No, this was going to be methodical. Clean. Like flipping a switch. I logged into the mortgage portal and declined the automatic draft I had set up years ago. The next payment would be missed. A late fee would hit. After that, the default notices would begin. I knew how long I had before foreclosure proceedings started. Long enough to prepare my next steps, but short enough to let the pressure build. Then, I contacted a lawyer. A friend of mine from college had recently joined a firm that specialized in property law. We weren't close, but we had stayed in touch enough for me to feel okay reaching out. I sent her the documents, told her everything. She was quiet for a long time before saying, "You've been scammed. But luckily, you're the one holding the cards." I asked what I could do. She said we had options. Over the next week, I did everything I could to gather proof. Texts, emails, copies of the original documents. Anything that showed I hadn't understood what I was signing. My friend, Lauren, said the case was clear. They had taken advantage of me. Even if it didn't meet criminal fraud standards, we had civil options. And more importantly, since the deed was under my name, I had full legal authority over the property. That's when the plan started to take shape. The next morning, I finally picked up one of Mom's calls. Her voice was all sugar and silk, laced with fake concern. "Adrian, honey, I know we've had our differences, but your father's been very stressed. The mortgage company keeps calling. We just want to talk." I let her speak. I let her lie. And when she finally asked, "Can we meet? Maybe over dinner?" I said sure. We arranged to meet at their house, my house, the following Saturday. She sounded relieved, like she believed I was coming to make peace. But that wasn't the reason I agreed. That week, I drafted a document with Lauren. It was short, simple, and powerful. It revoked all verbal permissions, clarified occupancy terms, and declared that any residents not on a legal lease agreement would be subject to removal. Lauren called it a notice of revocation of implied consent to occupy. Sounds fancy, but it boiled down to one thing. They were squatters. In my house. Saturday came. I wore a button-up and brought a manila folder. When I pulled into the driveway, Milo's car was parked crookedly as usual, blocking part of the sidewalk. The front lawn looked like it hadn't been mowed in weeks. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Mom opened it, already smiling like she'd won. "You came," she said, arms open for a hug. I didn't move. "Let's talk inside." They led me to the living room. Dad sat in his recliner, TV on mute, arms crossed. Milo was sprawled across the couch in basketball shorts, half asleep. I sat on the edge of the armchair and placed the folder on my lap. "Thanks for coming," Mom said, hands clasped like she was at a prayer circle. "We're really hoping to resolve this misunderstanding." "Good," I said. I opened the folder. "Because there is a misunderstanding. You seem to think you live here." Dad snorted. "Excuse me." I slid the top page across the coffee table. "You don't. Legally, this property belongs to me. There is no lease. There is no consent. That ends today." Mom's smile cracked. Milo sat up. Dad leaned forward. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted calmly. "And I am." I stood. "You have 30 days to vacate the property." Silence. Dead, eerie silence. Then Mom stood, face red, voice shrill. "You ungrateful little. How dare you do this to your own family?" "You already did," I replied. "I'm just finalizing the paperwork." And just as I turned to leave, Milo shouted after me. But I never heard what he said, because that was the exact moment my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. A push notification from the mortgage app. Payment declined. Property officially 30 days past due. Foreclosure warning initiated. And that was just step one. I didn't look back. As the front door closed behind me, I heard Mom's voice rise into a full shriek and something, maybe a glass, shatter against the wall. Milo was yelling, and Dad's voice boomed above them both, trying to restore some imaginary authority he thought he still had. I didn't flinch. I just walked to my car, got in, and sat in silence with the phone still in my hand, the notification glowing like a quiet little fuse. Foreclosure warning initiated. That line looped in my head the entire drive home. Not because I was afraid of it. No, far from that. It was the confirmation I'd been waiting for. The fuse was lit. Now I just had to wait for the boom. Back at my apartment, I sent the finalized documents to Lauren. Notice of occupancy termination, formal eviction notice, set to be filed in 30 days, and a request to initiate ownership restructuring once the foreclosure process fully began. But I also gave her one more document to look into, a transfer authorization from 4 years ago, one that I had signed under the assumption it was temporary. Lauren told me she'd dig into it. If there was evidence of manipulation or misrepresentation, we might even have grounds for damages. The next 2 days were surprisingly quiet. No calls, no texts. I figured they were scrambling, trying to find a way to undo what they'd done or pressure me into changing course. Maybe they thought it was just a bluff, that I was trying to teach them a lesson, and would come crawling back with an apology and a new payment. Then came day 3. I woke up to 3 missed calls and 2 voicemails from Dad. The first was short. "Adrian, we need to talk. It's urgent." The second was longer, angrier. "This isn't right, son. You're going to ruin your mother's health over some grudge. You need to grow up. You made a commitment. If you keep this up, well, we'll call a lawyer." I didn't respond. Instead, I checked my email. Sure enough, there it was, a message from their newly retained legal counsel. Except it wasn't a real lawyer. It was an old family friend named Mr. Caldwell, a retired civil clerk who probably hadn't seen a courtroom in 20 years. The email was filled with vague threats and guilt-tripping language. "Your actions are deeply hurtful to your family. If this matter is not resolved amicably, further action may be considered. Remember who raised you." I smiled. Not because it didn't sting, it did, but because it told me everything I needed to know. They had no real plan, no legal standing. They were just scared. And this was the part where they tried to manipulate me into feeling sorry for them. That same afternoon, I finally broke the silence. I texted my mom. "I'll be driving by the house on Friday at noon. If anything is damaged, removed, or altered, I'll be filing for emergency eviction. She replied within 5 minutes. Are you seriously doing this? You're going to make your own parents homeless. I'm not making anyone anything. You did this the moment you lied about the deed. That night, Milo texted me a photo of himself on the back porch with a beer in hand, captioned, "Hope you enjoy watching your house rot while we throw parties in it." I didn't respond, but I saved the photo. Lauren said it might come in handy if they tried to deny they were squatting. On Friday, I did exactly what I said I would. I pulled up to the curb, phone in hand, recording everything. The garage was open, junk everywhere. The front lawn was worse than before. There were new dents in the siding that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago, and the gutter was hanging loose, like someone had tried to climb it or pull something down. When I rang the doorbell, no one answered, but I knew they were home. I saw Milo's car in the driveway, and there was a faint thumping of bass from inside. I didn't bother knocking again. I turned, took a few more photos, and got back in my car. Later that day, I sent the full report to Lauren, who filed the pre-eviction affidavit. She said we were right on track, and if they didn't vacate willingly by the 30-day deadline, we'd file the court motion. That weekend, things took an unexpected turn. I got a message from a number I didn't recognize. No name, just one sentence. "You don't know everything that happened 4 years ago." Then another. "They didn't just lie to you. They lied to everyone." I stared at my phone, trying to place the number. It wasn't from any of the family members I knew. Not Milo, not my parents, not even distant cousins. Another message came in. "Check the county clerk's archive. Look at the notary on the deed transfer. Look real close." I froze. My heart thudded against my ribs. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours searching the public database, digging through files, old PDFs, signatures scanned into bad photocopies. And then, there it was. The deed transfer I signed. And the notary public listed on it wasn't registered in the state. Not then. Not now. The name didn't even come up on any licensing databases. The stamp had expired 2 years before the document was filed. It was fraudulent. The document that made me the legal owner of the house had been notarized by someone who didn't exist. And suddenly, this wasn't just a family betrayal. This was something else. Something criminal. And someone else was involved. I leaned back in my chair, mind racing. Questions burned through me. Who had done it? Why fake a notary instead of asking me to sign it properly? Had my parents known? Or had someone set them up, too? I didn't know the answer. Not yet. But I was going to find out. And when I did, I wasn't just going to evict them. I was going to expose everything. I sat in silence for nearly an hour after discovering the fraudulent notary stamp. My computer screen glowed in the dark room, the only source of light as I stared at the document again and again. The date on the stamp. The non-existent license number. The signature of someone who wasn't real. It was right there in front of me. Proof that someone had forged the entire transfer to place the house in my name. The house I'd been paying for. The house they now lived in like they owned it. I could have walked away. I could have just handed it all over and said, "Let the bank have it." But no, that would have let them walk away with everything. Years of guilt, manipulation, and deceit, without any real consequences. And whoever helped them forge that document, they'd walk away too. So I did the one thing I hadn't done since I left that house. I picked up the phone. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp and cold. "What now?" "I need to know something," I said. "And I need you to be honest for once." A pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The notary on the deed transfer," I said. "It's fake. The stamp expired before the document was signed. The name isn't registered in the state. There is no licensed notary by that name. So I'll ask again, who signed it?" Silence. Then a shaky breath. "You're digging into things you don't understand, Adrian." "No," I said calmly. "I understand perfectly. Someone forged a legal document and transferred the title of the house to me, so I would unknowingly assume the debt. That's fraud, which means someone committed a felony. And I'm guessing it wasn't a stranger. Still nothing. So I dropped the final blow. I've already sent the document to the county clerk and a property fraud investigator. If you don't tell me the truth now, they'll come knocking, and they won't ask nicely." She sighed, long defeated. "It was your father." I felt something twist in my gut. "He forged a legal stamp?" "No," she said quickly, almost defensively. "He didn't forge it himself. He knew a guy, someone he worked with, back before he got laid off. Said the guy had connections and could help us move the deed without going through all the red tape. We were desperate, Adrian. We thought it was the only way. The only way to what? I snapped. To trick your son into paying for your house. To gaslight me into thinking I was just helping out, while you dumped a mortgage into my lap and let me think it was voluntary. It was never supposed to go this far, she said. Her voice cracked. We thought we'd pay you back once things got better. I laughed bitterly. You never even tried. You just treated me like a servant and threw me out when you got tired of pretending to be grateful. I hung up. I didn't wait for a response. By the following week, I had everything I needed. Lauren filed the official complaint with the county, along with a request for property title reversion based on fraudulent transfer. At the same time, she coordinated with a fraud investigator who had already begun compiling a case. The forged notary stamp alone was enough to warrant investigation, and the fact that the document had led to financial exploitation gave us even more leverage. Then I made my final move. I filed for an emergency court injunction to reclaim possession of the property. The hearing was fast-tracked. Apparently, judges don't take kindly to fraudulent real estate transfers, especially ones involving forged notaries and unpaid mortgages. On the day of the hearing, my parents didn't even show. Their lawyer, the so-called Mr. Caldwell, submitted a written statement claiming the family had acted under misunderstood consent and that no harm was intended. The judge, a tired-looking woman with steel-gray hair and reading glasses, read through the documents with a scowl. Let me be clear, she said, tapping the file with her pen. This is a clear case of fraudulent conveyance, combined with financial exploitation of a family member. The fact that the defendants failed to appear only worsens the perception of intent. I'm granting Mr. Reyes immediate possession of the property. Any parties currently residing at that address must vacate within 15 calendar days or face forcible removal by law enforcement. Bang. Gavel down. Just like that. When I left the courtroom, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel victorious. I felt relief, like something had been lifted off my shoulders after 3 long years. That night, I sent a copy of the court order to my parents, along with a brief message. You have 15 days to leave the house. I suggest you use the time wisely. I expected another barrage of calls, of guilt-tripping, of desperate bargaining. Instead, there was silence. Cold, eerie silence. 12 days later, I drove to the house again, this time with a locksmith and 2 sheriff's deputies. The front yard was empty. Milo's car was gone. The porch was swept clean, the windows closed. The front door opened easily with the key the locksmith handed me. The house was bare. Not completely, but most of the furniture was gone. The TV, the couch, the kitchen stools. Their belongings had been stripped down to essentials. There were still nail holes in the walls where family photos used to hang. The living room echoed slightly when I stepped inside. On the counter was a folded piece of paper with my name written in my mother's handwriting. I opened it. Adrian, we're sorry. We know you won't believe it, but we never meant to hurt you. We thought we were doing what we had to. Goodbye, Mom. There was no return address. No contact info. Nothing. I stood in the middle of the house that night, alone. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a ruin. A broken temple of memories and betrayal. But it was mine. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from them. Not even Milo. They vanished, maybe out of shame, maybe out of spite. Maybe both. I changed the locks, cleaned the place out, and filed for fraud restitution. With Lauren's help, I was able to wipe the mortgage clean. The fraud voided the debt entirely. The house was now mine, free and clear. I sold it. I didn't want it anymore. I used part of the money for a down payment on a loft closer to the city. I donated a portion to a nonprofit that helps victims of family exploitation. And I tucked the rest away, not for revenge, not for show, but just for peace. People talk a lot about how family is everything. That blood is thicker than water. But sometimes, family is the first knife in your back and the last one to let go. I'm not bitter. I'm free. And that, more than anything else, is worth it.